I'm Ryan Reyes.
And I'm Dominic Angel.
And together we are
Un Poquito Podcast.
And today we have a guest.
What's our tagline?
Un Poquito.
What's our tagline?
Un Poquito. Exploring Latin culture little by little.
Ching ching. We're going to put a little ching ching noise in there.
It's pretty good.
If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us. Go ahead and like, comment, follow. Wait, was it?
If you're watching from YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Try to watch all the way if you can. It helps us get stuff done here on YouTube.
Leave a comment. Comments make you sexy.
That's what he says.
If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, 5 stars, please. You can follow us on TikTok and Instagram at unpoquitopod. Send us an email at unpoquitopod@gmail.com. Ryan reads all of them. I read some of them. You can also join us on Discord. Links are below. It's completely free, and the community's popping off in there. We talking about music, talking about video games, fucking movies, all kinds of good stuff.
Yeah. If you're looking to support us, we also have a Patreon. There's a poll up right now about hair color, but I'm pretty sure we know who won.
Well, I still have to dye my hair. I haven't forgotten about it, but it's because I got platinum. My hair's supposed to be platinum, and I'm like,
Yeah, so
I
we're
can't
gonna
do
get a
that on my
dye.
own. I'm going to kill my head if I...
But I got purple, so I'm just going to go to the store.
Yes. Just a reminder, I have a show. I'm going to be opening for Felipe Esparza November 27th. That's the Sunday after Thanksgiving at the Ontario Improv. I would love for you guys to show up and laugh. That's the only show that I want to promote right now. And
I have a show, but they haven't told me where it is, and it's on Mom's birthday.
Well, go to Ryan's show, follow him on Instagram, go to his show, and then say happy birthday to my mom, because she won't be there because it's her birthday, and she'll be with the good sons.
What he said. So what's happening today?
Well, today, speaking of movies, we have a great guest. Oh, because I said movies earlier. Should I start again?
No.
Okay. We're off the rails today.
So what's going on today?
Today, we're going to be talking about scary movies, right? And I got to be honest with you. I'm not into scary movies. I don't know about scary movies. I'm not like a horror guy, as they're called, I think. So we brought somebody that is an expert to tell us about horror movies.
So let us introduce
Mikey.
So let's introduce Mikey, the horror guy Peralta.
I love it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
welcome. Is it Mike or Mikey?
Mikey.
Okay,
The
cool.
nickname Mikey. Yeah.
Cool. I mean, I know that's what your handle says, but then Ryan has a habit of like, he has to remember people's names. And sometimes in order to remember it, it's the wrong name. Like it's not the wrong name, but it's like a variation.
Yeah.
Normally, I remember like last names first.
Yeah, so he'll refer to people as their last name.
Yeah, and I kind of like disregarded my last name, my whole handle, so I guess it makes sense. This is P Junior, so.
But yeah, thanks for joining us. I'm super excited. I feel like you were one of my early follows on TikTok.
I think so, yeah.
We had talked about it a little bit before recording, but when we were doing Isimo, we were always kind of like talking about representation and about how important it is and how like we need to like support Latino filmmakers. And then it was kind of like, well, none of us know where they are, where to look. Like, I know they're out there kind of a thing. And then as we're talking about that, it was around Halloween time last year, I feel like, that I followed you. Because that's your whole profile. Like you talk about Latin America, or like, well, what is that actual?
So like the tagline that I say is Latin American and other POC horror films. So basically everything that's not European.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's mostly stuff that's actually like in Latin. It's not like United States Latin American. It's like actually like
from Latin America, like from Peru and Cuba and stuff like that.
Hell yeah.
So
Hell
it's
yeah.
pretty cool.
How did you get into horror?
Into horror, actually, it dates back to high school. My friend, I remember him showing me The Evil Dead, the original one. And he was like, dude, you gotta check out this thing. Like, it's so fucking dope. Like, oh, wait, I can't cuss, right?
No, you can.
Oh, okay.
Fuck
I'm so
yeah,
sorry.
dude.
Okay, no, I'm sorry.
Shit. Hell yeah, dog. Balls. Where's that on I Think You Should Leave when they're doing the ghost? Have you seen that show?
No, I haven't.
They're touring a ghost. It's so stupid. They're touring. It's a ghost tour in a haunted house, and it's like, this is the adult tour. That means we can say anything. And then one of the characters is like, does that mean we can say horse cocks? And then the whole rest of the sketch, he's just saying horse cocks.
That's pretty awesome. I love ongoing gags like that.
So feel free throughout the episode to just sprinkle in horse cocks as much as you want.
I just started remembering the rest of that sketch. 'Cause they're like, what context would you need to say horse? I just, what if one pops out? And then at the end, a ghost pops out.
Of course.
Yeah. But yeah, so did you ever watch Evil Dead?
Yes.
Dude,
Sam Raimi's the best.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, is Evil Dead the one with the
chainsaw arm?
Chainsaw arm?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah,
I hadn't seen
that's
the
Evil Dead
first one,
2.
or is that I was going to
Evil Dead
say,
2.
damn. I'm just kidding. We just roasted
Guys.
the whole episode.
No, it's all good.
You should be leading this
actually,
conversation.
I mean, I'm sure you know this, but this is one of my fun facts
All right.
about Sam Raimi. Technically, Evil Dead 2, for the first half of it, is just a recap of Evil Dead 1. It's like literally just them showing Evil Dead 1 all over again, because the company that produced the first movie wouldn't give him the rights back. So they couldn't make money off of it. So they made a sequel, and they funded it themselves, and then eventually found a different company to produce. And they called it Evil Dead 2. And it kind of just has like a new ending that has like, it's supposed to lead to a franchise.
And it did. It did. I actually didn't know that, so that's pretty cool.
Did you hear about the third one was supposed to be called Medieval Dead? But the studio didn't like that name.
I didn't hear about that, but Army of Darkness is like my least favorite. I know I'm probably going to get canceled for that, but
I think it would have been better if they had called it Medieval Dead.
That's a
it would have
really
been
awesome
much
name.
better experience overall.
What are the top 5 horror movies? Go.
I'm going to go with Predator. I love that film.
Predator's a horror movie?
Yeah, dude, it's a slasher.
Sci-fi horror.
It's just, think about this. Okay, so like we got our, it's not our typical, teens or whatever, but we got our squad, each of them gets taken down one by one in like this horror like esque type of scenes. It's a slasher, bro.
I just realized.
Does that make Arnold the final girl?
Yeah, I was
Hell
gonna
yeah.
say that means Arnold's a
Hell
virgin.
yeah. He's the final boy, man.
Oh man. Okay, so Predator.
So I'm going off basically that's off of my top 5. I'm just saying.
Probably because he's so aggressive. Do it now.
Exactly. Get to the chopper.
Is that the bottom of your top 5 or the top of your top 5?
You know what? It's really tough to like do an actual top 5, like in order. But today I'm gonna say that's probably like number 3. I don't know. I'm kind of just guessing here now. So then I'll probably say Evil Dead would be like number 2, and then I'd probably go with. I wish I had this plan because like now I just can't think of any movies.
I know. I really set you up for failure.
No, you're all good. You're all good.
Okay, so what constitutes, other than like the listing, what constitutes like a horror movie?
Okay.
I would say. Well, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I would add, not necessarily because there's also like action movies that have this, but excessive gore. Like at least. I've seen horror movies that aren't rated R, that are PG-13, but I think at least approaching rated R territory when it comes to like visual effects.
Definitely.
One time I was on a bus when I was like, I must have been like 12 years old. And we were going from California to El Paso. And so I didn't know that like anybody. So have you ever traveled cross country on a bus?
No.
So they have these like TV screens that are low. And I didn't know that anybody could just put up a movie if they wanted.
Like anyone can do it?
Anybody on the bus could do it, which is pretty tight. But I thought it was just like somebody like the bus driver was like, yeah, we're gonna play, because sometimes nobody played movies, and I was like, this bus driver fucking sucks. But somebody put on a movie, and it was Phantasm. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's a trip. It just has to do with like other dimensions and stuff. But the opening to the movie was so wild because it's like these two people having sex in a graveyard. I mean, it's very typical 80s movies, and then it just like opens up. Well, the woman opens up her shirt, right, and then these huge breasts fall out, and then it's like a glamour shot of her, and then the guy's like, "Ooh," and then she stabs him, and then that's how the movie starts.
That's hilarious.
It's pretty awesome.
And that's the only thing I remember from that movie. I,
Like
understandably.
I'm picturing it as you're exactly how you're depicting it. So it's just like, "Woo!"
Yeah, it's like boing, boing, boing. There's like six of them.
Is there a scene where a dude loses his fingers?
No, that's a Mexican movie that we saw. This is bringing up weird ass memories. There was a Mexican movie that I don't know what it's called because it's in Spanish, but there's a scene where they're like doing knife fights, and then the guy was like, he cuts his hand and he's like, "Oh, you lost." Like he gets like a deep cut in his thumb right there, and then he's essentially like double or nothing, and then so he does it like super fast, and he's like,
Stabs him
"All
right
right."
in the hand.
Jeez.
Well, the guy did it, and he stabbed himself right in the middle of that.
Jeez.
Anyway,
At least he's missed his fingers.
oh no, he cut off his finger, didn't he?
No, I was thinking a different movie, but I also remembered what you remembered.
Anyway,
I wanted to ask, because you brought up that one of your favorites is The Predator. Have you seen the whole franchise?
Yes. And even including like the Alien versus Predator ones.
How would you rank those?
That's going to be a hard one. So I would say, obviously, for nostalgic reasons, like I really loved Predator. And then from there, I would go with Prey, which is the most recent entry that came out on Hulu. It's just because it's essentially the whole climax of Predator into a feature-length film, but it even talks about like the whole like colonization and stuff, and we get the whole like indigenous representation as well. So I fucking love that. And then from there, I'd probably go with, just on top of my head again, I'd probably go with Predators, which is the one with what's his name, Topher Grace, Eric.
is it Topher Grace?
Oh, the one with
I can't remember
the guy
his name.
that played the pianist?
Oh,
yeah,
Adrian
yeah.
Brody.
Yes,
I was like,
that one.
Topher Grace.
Oh,
But he's in
also
it too,
that.
though.
Oh, he
yeah.
is?
Yeah.
He's a serial killer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then I'd probably go Predator 2, which is basically like the Predator in LA, which is pretty dope, in the 90s, you know?
Pretty cool.
And then we got probably say the first Alien vs. Predators, because that was one of the first ones I saw too when I was a kid, so it's good times. And then Requiem just sucks. The Alien vs. Predator Requiem is just horrible.
Yeah, that was weird. It was one of the first movies like post 2010 to like shoot a kid in the face.
Yeah, that I didn't know, but yeah.
There's like a
that's
there's a
shot.
bunch
I know it
of
was one of the first films.
like
Yeah.
there's a bunch of unwritten rules about horror movies, and one of
Mm-hmm.
them is like that children can't get hurt. If they do, it's off screen. But no, or he doesn't get shot. He gets
Eaton.
incepted,
Mm-hmm.
and the alien comes out of his chest. But they showed the graphics of it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say I don't necessarily know who's in my top 5. I think definitely Predator is at the top of that list.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, number 2 is gonna be The Predator, because that movie was corny as shit. But I loved it.
I completely forgot about that one.
When I saw that movie was corny, everyone hated that movie. It was like, you got to think of it like Monster Trucks. Like, you don't go to Monster Trucks to talk about like eloquent conversation. You go to Monster Trucks to see shit blow up.
Yeah.
Like, that movie was awesome.
I'll give it that they tried. Is just what I hated about that one is Shane Black. Like, I don't know, he's usually a good director, you know, but it was just a lot of like camera movements where you couldn't see anything. I didn't know what the hell was going on half the time. You know?
I liked, my favorite scene is when they teach, there's a predator dog, and it's literally just like a giant dog
With
a
dreads.
predator face.
Oh yeah.
It
I mean,
really
it's a pretty
dumb.
sick. I don't know. I personally like the design. I thought it was pretty dope.
Because I saw something run. I remember watching that with my little brother, and you hear something running, and no, there's like when they first introduce, there's fog, and you can't really see the dog at first. And I look at it, and I'm like, is it just gonna be a dog with the predator head on it? And it was. And
But
me
a
and my
lot
little
bigger,
brother like
too.
laughed our asses off. That was great.
Do you think that like you being like Mexican has any ties to like you liking horror?
Oh,
Like,
definitely, without a doubt.
how close are you to like like for instance, like we don't really go to Mexico. Like I haven't been since I was like 13. We don't speak Spanish. So like how like rooted to like traditional Mexican culture are you?
Pretty deeply rooted. I've been lucky enough to be able to go countless of times. I'd say maybe 6 times. So my mom's from Mazatlan, and that's usually where we go. I haven't visited my dad's country.
Where's that at?
In Mazatlan, or where my dad's from Cuernavaca. Mazatlan is like a little beach city down in like, I don't know if it's considered Baja, like Mexico, but it's like a little beach city.
I haven't heard of it, so
yeah, it's a really beautiful location, and like I said, like I'm very lucky that I've gone to go numerous of times, and then on top of that, like considering the whole like me being deeply rooted, I speak Spanish, and I've been working in the construction field since I was like 16, 17. So like I'm always hanging out with like the 30-year-olds, 40-year-old like Mexicans. Yeah. So we're just like cracking jokes half the time and stuff.
Are they just telling like wild ghost stories the whole time?
Yeah. And there's a lot of those growing up, like in my family. So just to give you guys an idea, like one of the stories that I hear a lot from my grandma is this place where she used to live. I guess they were like remodeling her restroom, and then when they removed the tiles, just a skeleton came out.
What?
Yeah,
like a real skeleton?
Yeah, it just popped on the floor.
Did it sound like dropping xylophone?
I don't know. All I heard is that a skeleton came out, and then I heard that I guess a general used to live there. I have no idea. I don't know the whole like logistics of that. But my mom and a couple of my tias do have a couple of stories of little children walking around at night.
It's always little children. I feel like Mexicans just like have a thing with like killing babies or like having ghost kids in their house. Because in our house was built, the one that we grew up in was built like in the 50s or 60s. And then it was renovated by my grandpa in like the 80s. And like I could have sworn I heard voices though sometimes.
That's possible.
But they used to say that there was like little kids that you could hear them along like a certain wall. Like if you were in the garage, you could hear that it sounded like they were coming from the room that was on the other side. And then they said the same thing in that room.
Jeez.
And then sometimes I would be like sneaking around the backyard to like jump it through the window because I lost my key. So I would like put my ear up against it. I'm like, oh shit, somebody's home. I can't jump in through the window. But it was those fucking ghost kids.
Those damn ghost kids, man.
Do you think that relates to... So I like talking about this, but usually a lot of people don't know what I'm talking about. Have you heard of, I think it's Duende?
I feel like I've heard of the name, but can you remind me?
They're like Mexican goblins.
Okay, that's
not even a little bit.
No, okay never mind then.
When you look at their depiction, they look like pixies, but they're described... So the reason I like bringing it up is because you hear a lot... I remember growing up, and kids around me would people usually, like, when you lose a left shoe or something goes missing in your garage, like, I feel like white people say, like, elves took it, house elves took it. But for some reason, Mexicans would say leprechauns took it. And they'd say it in Spanish. When they would translate it, I was told that in English it meant leprechauns. And when I started looking it up, the closest I could come to in regards to this was the duende. Now, when you look at the duende, it actually looks more like a house elf, like a fairy that lives in a home and like steals things. But I think because in its lore, it has an affinity for specifically stealing shiny things and like repairing shoes. There's a lot of like overlapping mythology when it comes to house elves and leprechauns, and so I think Mexicans just called them leprechauns in English.
I think it was because there's 5 movies about leprechauns.
One with Jennifer Aniston.
That movie was great. I think it was probably terrible, right?
It's been too long. I don't know. I know. It's been too long for those.
Like one of those like so good it's bad, but it did get progressively worse. Like Leprechaun in the Hood was terrible.
I've heard the title. Classic. I haven't seen that one.
Okay, but we got to take a step back and like recollect ourselves because there's 2 things I want to talk about.
Yeah, of course.
So you are like you have your ties to Mexico, and so like your parents, like your family, would tell ghost stories, or they would like, are they like spooky people?
The opposite. They're actually very religious. Very religious. But so like my mom wouldn't really tell me many stories, but whenever I would visit her hometown in Mazatlan, like my uncles and cousins, they were the ones that were telling me these stories about, just like all these ghost stories and witchcraft and stuff. Well, to them it was bad, but luckily we've had a better spin on it now in modern times. So
Yeah.
So I was actually a very scaredy cat growing up. So like I remember watching The Ring. I was in Mexico, and we were in this little room. And then I don't know. Have you guys seen the American version of The Ring?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So let's say that first jump scare right in the closet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I fucking booked it. I was like, all right, I'm not watching this. Yeah, I was like, I'm done with this.
I remember I went to go see that movie with some friends, and we all like it was a bunch of guys, so we're all like in our bro, like we're cool, like we don't get scared.
Yeah.
And then before the movie starts, we're like, I turned to my friend Rudy and I was like, hey, if any of us jumps, no, we didn't. All right. Like,
yeah. It's honestly a very effective film. But yeah, so like that one or like the Grudge scared the crap out of me too.
Those two came out
like
at the same time, and like they traumatized a whole generation.
Yeah,
dude.
yeah, I was part of that generation. And keep in mind too, so like I was growing up in the church, so like I didn't really watch any of this stuff growing up. So I had to watch it, like with my friends or my cousins. So like it was even more scarier. And then when these jump scares came out, I was just like, fuck, man, like I couldn't even sleep for like weeks. It got to the point where even what's the one with Hugh Jackman called Van Helsing, that scared me.
Oh yeah, there was one big jump scare when what's it called, Dr. Jekyll, like when Mr. Hyde comes out.
Yeah.
And I was like, what?
And the wolf, like the werewolf had a very good design in it too.
Oh, that was a really
he was
cool
fucking
one.
Scary, dude.
He like shed
that was
his
one
skin.
of the first times where or not the first time, but they did a good job of like. I like the tearaway effect that they did in that movie. It was like one of the best like digital depictions of a werewolf, because usually they do that with CGI and it's a lot grosser. Can I ask though? So would you say that The Ring was like one of the like your first scary movie?
I don't remember. I would say it's either between The Ring, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or Scream 2, I believe. So I have 3 really early memories where I remember watching the remake to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and at my cousin's house, and on my way home, I kept on checking the back seat to see if he was there, And then the Scream, I think it's Scream 2 or Scream 1 where Ghostface comes out of the van, and then I just dipped after that scene. And then so like those films are definitely like one of my early like introductions to horror. And then I really didn't watch much until in high school where my friend introduced Evil Dead.
Right. Mm-hmm. Did your parents let you watch scary movies, or was it like you had to sneak around?
Yeah, dude. I couldn't even watch Disney Channel. Like it was bad.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's so funny because I feel like Mexicans take their fucking kids to scary movies, like midnight premieres. Like they just. It's like I feel like
it's mostly like Mexican dads. Like our mom didn't like us watching it because me and my little brother would get really scared. But our dad, like, it was one of our things watching that. That and like comedy specials were like the 2 things we always watched with our dad. Because I remember one of my first movies, I think, was the Chucky series. But it was like
Mexicans love Chucky, dog.
It was the first one I ever saw was The Bride of Chucky.
Nice. I used to see they used to play Chucky on daytime TV, like on like Telemundo all the fucking time.
Nice.
It's funny because I feel like the only movie where it's like I see like a whole family of Mexicans show up is like The Exorcist.
Yeah, and yet they're like very traumatized from it. Like it's crazy.
The Catholic trauma.
Because actually now that just brought up a memory. I remember seeing. My cousin was watching it, and I already knew, like, I was just very, like, I just didn't want to watch it. I was like, nah, hell no, dude. And I remember just passing by my cousin's room, and it's that scene where Reagan turns her head. And I was just like, what the heck, man? Like, I dipped again. I was
bringing
like,
the devil into this house.
I was like, I didn't even want to watch this. And then she's just, like, staring into my soul. And I was like, crap.
Your cousin was watching it from the ceiling.
I remember, that reminded me of... I got progressively more like paranoid with I started developing, not because of horror movies, just coincidentally, like anxiety disorders, and so it made watching like early 2000 horror movies a huge problem for me. And like because of that, this guy and our older brothers and cousins, whenever a scene would pop up, they'd pause it, rewind it 10 seconds and then be like, hey, Ryan, come here. And I'm like, no, I know what you're going to show me. Stop it. It's not. It's funny. We swear.
I mean, that's one way to get desensitized.
Well, the thing is, what was really funny, the reason why we started doing that, I'm not going to deny it, was because one time we were watching like a werewolf, like Wolfman, one of the Wolfman movies. And Ryan had this habit of like standing directly in front of the TV, and he couldn't take himself away from it. And he would get like really like excited, and he would like pace and like do this. So he was like stimming and like, but he couldn't. And we were like, Ryan, get away from the TV. It was like the scene was very clearly, all signs were pointing to this fool was going to turn into a werewolf. And like the fucking moon was going, the birds were flying, the wind, the music, and like everything but this dude's face. And we're like, Ryan, get away from the TV. You're going to get scared. Ryan, get away from the TV. You're going to get scared. And he was like, no, I'm okay. And like he was doing this. And then the fucking werewolf turned around and was like, rah! And then Ryan fucking torpedo dove from the TV all the way across the living room into the couch. Man. Like he went into the cushions. It was like a Tom and Jerry cartoon.
Oh my God.
That was one of the funniest things that I've ever seen in my life. So that's why we scared him.
At his expense.
We tried to warn him.
Yeah, I feel like though I still get anxious when I watch horror movies, but I enjoy like the kind of like cinema aspect of them a lot more now. Like I feel like especially, I mean, I don't know how you feel about this because you were bringing up that a lot of your movies, the movies you came up on were like the late 2000, early 2010 horror movies. And I feel like there was an era of just over the top effects and gore and slash and like pop-up scares for a long time. I feel like once we breached that, I started getting back into horror movies. How do you feel about that? Like the eras of horror since like the 80s?
Yeah. So like, the era that you're talking about is, like the early 2000s is considered the aughts horror, you know,
right.
Then that's how they call it. And, I personally really like that area. That era. It's very, it's like you said, it's very gruesome. It's like them trying, I would say they're almost trying to reach like extreme levels of horror. Cause like, I don't know did you guys ever watch The Hills Have Eyes remake?
I did.
Okay.
My cousin had it.
So like that one is actually one of my favorites.
That's the aughts one? Because it was originally like from like the 70s.
Yeah, something like the 70s or something.
It was like a big on reboots.
Yeah, it was big on reboots.
Right.
And, you know, like I was a big fan of the Jason reboot and hated the Nightmare on Elm Street one, obviously. But yeah, like just something about that era that's very grimy. It's very like I said, it tries to reach that really extreme horror. Because like The Hills Have Eyes, I think is even directed by his name is, I think it's Alejandro Aja or something. I may be butchering it, but he does like extreme horror in France. So like the fact that he made an American film and it was just that like intense, I was like, wow, like this guy, like he's like this era is just really going at it, you know? And like people have tied it to like very like post 9/11 and like, and that's like we're starting to see so much like carnage and more intense
right.
like scenes, you know what I mean, like on screen.
Yeah. I've read stuff about that, about how like things popped up after like major historical events. Yeah. Like zombies came after the recession. And like, is that the one? There was like gore, and then there was like zombies, and then vampires after like major things, and it has to do with like how people feel about like what's going on in the world.
Yeah. So like Night of the Living Dead, like there's this huge like commentary on like capitalism, consumerism, and all that stuff, you know. And then, you know, even then, like, so I actually wrote about this once, where I wrote how The Night of the Living Dead wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Mr. Rogers.
What?
And that's because this is during the whole like civil rights movement, you know. So like you know, like there's this you know, like, so yeah, like there's this whole movement going on, you know. And then George Romero, you know, which is the director, he was basically like, he was in, I believe film school, and he was just trying to film a movie, and it happened to be Mr. Rogers like has some sort of surgical thing, basically. I can't remember the actual surgery, but he films like this surgery for Mr. Rogers. And then from there on, like it kind of gives him the confidence to go out and do Night of the Living Dead. You know what I mean? And if I might be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure like they've had a relationship like later on, and like he kind of like he wouldn't put his input in it, but like he would really he'd kind of just tell him that he's doing a great job and stuff. That George Romero was doing a great job, and then when he wrote the script, it wasn't like he didn't really have like a black person in mind, but the fact that he got Dwayne Johnson as like the main protagonist, like that alone is just showing like just what's going on in the world, because he chose to choose like a black person, you know, to fighting off these hordes of like white people. You know what I mean?
Dwayne Johnson.
I'm sorry. Am I saying Dwayne Johnson? It's Dwayne Jones.
Oh, okay.
I'm so sorry.
I was like,
Dwayne Jones. I am so sorry.
I looked it up immediately.
Dwayne Jones. Yeah, I was like, my bad. It's because I saw that Black Adam thing on the way over here.
Right.
I think it just stayed in my subconscious. Dwayne Jones. I'm so sorry about that, you guys.
Night of the Living Dead with The Rock, though.
That would have been sick.
The giant fire.
They should remake it. They should just like digitally put The Rock in the original movie, like one of those. Look like the Scorpion King.
Probably worse.
Just like
that's crazy though. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
about Mr. Rogers.
Mm-hmm. So like that's all like credited. Yeah, I mean you could say it's credited to Mr. Rogers. You know what I mean? And you know he essentially started the zombie. Romero started the zombie movement in America, because we did have them in Haiti actually before.
Yeah. Well, so there's like history behind that, because the term zombie originally related to a very specific kind of, I remember a little bit, I don't remember where I learned this. I think it was through like crack.com. The videos they used to make were very well in depth. But the history of the use of the word zombie used to be in reference to a very specific kind of undead creature. It was related to black magic and like old movies about that topic. Like that's where the zombie would come from in those old movies. And so in Night of the Living Dead, the term was the undead. And that's like the term that was used for a very long time in America, until eventually there was so much being made about the undead. There were so many different variations of zombies that the guys that were trying to coin the term and own it were like, fuck it. Like so much media had been made about zombies that they couldn't control it anymore. I'm like, all right, everyone calls them zombies now. We're just going to call them zombies now.
That.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry. How do we get? Okay, so we got like. There's so much stuff to unpack here, but I want to get to like your actual like what you do. Like you write and you're a TikToker, and you put out content that's like, like talking about recommending like a Latin American cinema. So how do you go from like just like being a fan of horror and like being like gravitating towards like actually promoting like Latin American?
So I started writing like about horror movies. You know, it was just basically any movie I would watch, you know, and I would write about them. I started writing like 2018, I think. And then from there I went to Mexico in 2020. So like months before the pandemic started. So I got very lucky there too. But I watched my first El Santo film there. Are you guys familiar with him?
No.
So he's essentially the face of the luchador subgenre in Mexico. So like it's basically a bunch of luchadores fighting against monsters. You know what I mean?
Oh shit!
Yeah, it's pretty dope. Monsters.
That's a whole genre of movies.
Yeah, dude. So like it started from the 60s and it went all the way to the 80s. And like just to give you guys an idea, like these were like made so much that he came out in like 50 films, I think, in that span of 20 years. Damn. So like he was just pumping them out. And yeah, so I watched those films and like they're just very like camp, you know what I mean? They're very, very camp, but there's something about them that I love them, you know, like there's so much charm to it. Seeing a luchador like going toe to toe with the freaking like a mummy, you know what I mean, in one movie, or like that's fighting against Dracula in the other one, like it's just it's awesome, you know.
It's the Night of the Living Dead with The Rock.
Exactly. Well, there we go.
That was something that brought up something that I wanted to ask, because I feel like when we talk about, whenever me and Dominic specifically get into conversations about like the different subcultures and genres of America, and like, you know, the thing of like always you don't see a lot of Latinos into this stuff. I feel like in America that's true. And I feel like people think that this stuff is new to Mexico, like their experiences with comedy and sci-fi and horror, but I feel like they just haven't been paying attention. So I wanted to ask this, like, how would you say what is the difference between like American style horror and how it's developed over the last like even just the last 10 years, and like stuff that exists in Mexico, like the luchador thing that Americans just aren't aware of that might be more interesting about like horror. Like what's Mexico's style of horror?
So for Mexico style of horror during let's stick this to the 60s and 80s is if you're not doing like a creature feature, you're doing a bunch of like paranormal, like spooky, like haunted house type of stuff. So it's either one or the other basically. And you didn't really divert from that until you hit like the late 80s, I think. That's when you really started to see a jump in like basically just all these filmmakers really just going at it. You know what I mean? Like we've had like the director Alejandro Jodorowsky, I think. And You know what I mean? Like his films came out in the late 80s and kind of just gave us a different style versus like the creature features and the haunted house films.
So real quick, like those terms you're dropping, like obviously these are subgenres of horror. Like, so what?
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Can you like, no.
Yeah,
It's interesting. Like what are the subgenres of like horror?
There's just like, honestly, there's just too many, but like, just to give you guys an idea, you know what I mean? So creature features would be anything with a monster basically.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then, you know, we do have like your paranormal, which is basically anything like
Ghosts.
Yeah, ghosts and stuff. I don't want to say like spooky, but yeah, like it's like ghosts and stuff. And hauntings, yes, that's a good word. And then, you know, like we would get to more like art house styles, which is something more that we see in America actually. So like art house horror films would be something like, I'm trying to think of something. Have you guys ever seen like It Follows?
Yes.
Yeah, so something like
yes.
that where there's just something to it that feels, I don't want to say artful because it's like demeaning everything else, you know what I mean? But yeah, and then like that's the thing is I don't want to call it elevated horror either, because that's a term that's going around right now, and I personally hate it.
What is elevated horror?
So basically, people are saying that like it's the new version of saying like it's not a horror film, it's a thriller film to justify them liking horror. You know what I mean?
Oh, it's kind of like when people were like the Avengers came out and they're like, it's good as a movie and a superhero movie. Like.
Yeah,
that's the thing is like every horror film from like the 30s have had some sort of social commentary, you know what I mean? It's just that like since a lot of us didn't live in that time, obviously, like we're not aware of what exactly is going on. And that's why people call horror films nowadays elevated for certain ones, because like they can kind of catch on what the director's trying to say. You know what I mean?
It's crazy because I feel like that's a good point. But it's weird because I feel like a lot of those like classic horror movies, like they're considered like these are movies you should watch. Like these are classics. These are like Criterion Collection, like all of the Universal horror movies from like way back in the day, and like all the silent films. Like a lot of them are horror, but I feel like, I mean, obviously like goth people fucking like Bela Lugosi and shit, but like, you know, I still like, you know, as a filmmaker, because I used to study film, and it's like as a filmmaker, these were some of like cutting edge movies, and like these were considered like they weren't popcorn movies like they're considered today.
I do feel like that's been a thing where as I mentioned, it feels like horror movie went through phases, because that was like super prevalent in the early stages of horror, but there was also like, I want to say with the exception of like Candyman, there were you know, like slashers became a thing. Slashers set an idea for what a horror movie was supposed to be, and I feel like because of that, during the time of like slasher reboots, the alt era, I think that's where that started, where you wouldn't be calling it a horror film. You wouldn't even be calling it a scary movie. You'd be calling it a suspense thriller.
Exactly.
Movies like Hide and Seek with Robert De Niro, or like The Secret Window.
Yeah.
But
or
it's
like Silence of the Lamb is a big one where people are consistently arguing about.
And it's like, no, I mean, I think these all fall into the category, at the very least, of, it sounds like kind of childish to phrase it, but at the very least of like a scary movie, even if it's not specifically gore horror, you know?
Yeah. And this actually circles back to what we're talking about Predator on like, is it a horror film? You know what I mean?
Right.
So, yeah.
I've heard that argument. I agree with that. I especially like, I think I like that kind of viewpoint when you watch the movie. Like, it's not just an action movie. It's like a single entity hunting down a group of people. I think I really like that. It also like, I think translates to the movies that connect to it. Like even Alien. Alien is a suspense thriller, but it's also, you know, I feel like it's not necessarily a zombie movie, but it relates more to like a creature feature type movie.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, so going back, like, because I want to know this.
Yeah.
Of like, so you started writing in 2018 as like, where did you start writing? Like, what was that like?
Okay, so I started a blog at that time called
Okay.
Descent into Horror, and that's when I just kind of started writing.
And are you still doing that?
Yeah. So DescentIntoHorror.com is still a thing, and now I just have my writing profile on there because I do write for Dread Central now.
Okay.
So that's really nice. And
Real quick,
then
what's that?
sorry.
No. I like I said, I just don't know any of this stuff, so I'm interested in learning.
Yeah.
Because I feel like horror is such. So I'm not into horror. I was talking to Josh the American earlier, and we were talking about. I've recently, through like 2020, I think one of the reasons why I was so averse to horror was I had a lot of death anxiety, which is like really on the front of the face of any horror movie, you know? And recently I've gotten more into like death culture, like doulas and spiritualism and like, and afterlife studies and stuff like that. So all that to say, like all of this stuff, I always think is fascinating when people are like super into like horror and it has like its own criteria, like its own like these really cool subgenres. Like I had never heard the term creature feature or like the fucking luchador fighting monsters. Like that's fucking cool. So yeah, it was Dread Central?
Yes. They're one of the bigger horror publications right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like next to like Fangoria, Bloody Disgusting.
I've heard of
like,
that.
Yeah.
I've heard of Fangoria.
Yeah, Fangoria is the biggest one, I believe.
Right.
Is Fangoria the one that funds Beyond Fest?
I'm not entirely sure.
And Beyond
But
Fest
probably.
It's like a Comic-Con for horror fans.
isn't it like, is it a Comic-Con?
The one in Long Beach or Huntington Beach?
There was, I think so. There was one that was on the book. That's a whole different conversation. Apparently, they were going to buy out Kamikaze, which was Stan Lee's Comic-Con before it became the LA Comic-Con. And there was going to be an LA-based Beyond Fest.
Okay.
But then...
I thought Beyond Fest was a movie festival.
I'm be
It's
honest,
a
I
little
don't
bit
know.
of both. Like, it's for horror fans, from what I understand of it.
It's for genre film.
Genre.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all the same thing. Genre is, but you can consider it like a thriller, sci-fi, kung fu. You know what I mean? Basically everything that's not drama. Basically.
Right.
Yeah.
But then Stanley got permission to call his Comic-Con, so they made money. They were able to like save themselves.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So you started writing for Dread Central, which
Yes.
is a big publication. So is it just like it's a horror movie like magazine kind of a thing?
Yeah. So it's a online magazine. So
Okay.
like they'll give you like the latest news and the latest like, so yeah, like the latest news, and then there's a lot of writers who like, which is called a column. You know, like each writer has their own column, and it's what they focus on. So like I have my column is called Horror in Espanol, which is where I talk about these Latin American horror movies. And like I have a buddy who I think his is called New Queer Extremity, where he talks about extreme films with a queer perspective.
Okay.
So stuff like that.
What's your friend's?
His is John Patterson.
John Patterson?
Yeah.
Cool.
And great writer, just gotta say that. So.
So is that how you got into like starting your TikTok of like promoting these movies just through Dread Central?
Yeah, pretty much.
And then, so, I mean, I don't want to call anybody out because I'm sure it's a good publication, but like, I just want to know, like, professionally, like, was there a need for like horror in Espanol or like, I would like to believe, just based off of like being Mexican and seeing the people around me, of like, there's got to be like a ton of like Mexican people in like horror, like professionally. So like, is that the case that you've seen like with writers and stuff?
I would say like yes and no. So like there is I'm trying to see how to phrase this.
That's what it's like.
Yeah. So there are writers that have written about like Latin American movies. For the most part, you're gonna see them talk about Mexican horror films,
Right.
which I have no problem because I love them.
Right.
The problem is they're the more easily accessible ones, and you would probably get someone mention it like here and there. Whereas I'm talking about this monthly. Sometimes when I'm lucky, I can talk about a film bi-monthly. And so like in October, I was able to release one piece, which is part of my column. But I also just recently published a piece called 5 Horror Films That Challenge the Colonial Mindset. And I kind of just like briefly went over a couple of films, you know, that talk about going against the colonial mindset and stuff. So I would say that while these other publications did have some form of like Latin American representation, I was just like, there needs to be something more consistent, and which is what I decided to do.
Right. So it would be like other people would be doing like, oh, here's like a find, like every now and then when something would make a lot of noise. Or
like certain websites will have like, here are 5 films for Latin American Heritage Month. Yeah. But then you wouldn't hear anything about it for another couple months.
Right, you know what I mean? And it's interesting. I feel like you could learn a lot about a culture based off of like their horror movies, because there's Japanese horror, like Korean, like Asian horror movies are wild. Yeah, you know.
Oh yeah, they get down, man.
yeah. And so like, you have Latin American horror movies or like, I mean, just like horror, different movies from all over the world, and you get to learn about like their folklore and like what they consider like scary, or what they think about death, or what like
exactly.
So that's really cool. What was I gonna say? So how long have you been doing this this article?
I want to say I just started September of last year, because I just did my 1 year anniversary piece.
Oh hell yeah!
Which is on one of my favorite all-time favorite Latin American films, Alucarda. Like that's the one where I was just like, that's the film. So like I started watching El Santo films. I was like, man, these are great. But I watched Alucarda, and I was like, this is the one that just made me dive deep into like Latin American horror films, because like it's just so creative. It was very unique. And so like I said, I grew up in a religious household. It's a nunsploitation film. So like it's just going against like...
Wait, it's a what?
A nunsploitation film.
Exploitation.
Nunsploitation. So it's films...
Nunsploitation.
So it's films about nuns.
Right.
But they're usually very like exploitative, you know what I mean? So like it's usually... it's basically films about nuns going against like the priest, going against religion. Right. You know, wanting to do what they want, you know, regardless of the consequences of the oppression that they're facing, you know? And that's what this film does really well. Like it gets to the point where like you're starting to see these crosses burn, you know what I mean? Like it's it's very blasphemous, and I just fucking loved it for that reason.
That's interesting. I feel like it makes sense though, because there is a lot of like Mexican culture is like very, obviously there's a lot of like Catholic trauma and like people. When year did that movie come out?
In like the 70s. Oh, in Mexico. I want to say it came out 78. I could be wrong. Yeah, I think it's 78. But yeah, so like this is a very like old film, but it's still like, it's gnarly, it's gory. It's just insane. Like,
I wonder if that translates to like why like first and second generation Latinos in America take their kids to the movies. Because I also remember like a lot of comedians make jokes about Latino families in horror movies, but it's always the same horror movies. It's always like
Chucky,
the big slashers.
Yeah,
it's either slashers or it's occult movies. It's movies about hauntings, and I wonder if that's because of like where their classics were. And so like they see movies like that here, and they're like, oh, that's like where I came from. Yeah. I'm wondering if that's how that got started.
I could see that, because like again, like I have a lot of stories that deal with like, well, not me, but like I said, like my family that deal with like hauntings and stuff like, and I imagine that's why like a bunch of like I would say Mexicans, just because like that's what I'm around mainly, right, are more like that gravitate more towards that stuff. You know what I mean? But of course, I imagine like all Latinos had deal with this type of like supernatural stuff in their countries and stuff as well, you know?
I was trying to remember the figure, but it was up until recently, up until like the last few years, like Mexicans were not considered a viable, like they they were considered a constant, like 30% of all movie ticket sales, and like it wouldn't budge.
Yeah.
But what they found was that they wouldn't try, like when you do playtest, not playtest, but like test screenings of movies, they do not want Latinos, like, you know, I used to work for a screening company, and they would like have us turn them away.
That sucks.
Yeah, you had to do it very sneakily, but it's like literally the only way a fucking Mexican was getting into that movie is if they were with 4 white people. Like that was like happened so much. I mean, actually, it didn't happen so much because how often does?
Yeah.
But literally, but the only times that they like were like, okay, we gotta have as many Latinos in the room for test screenings was for like movies in Spanish and horror movies. That's the only time that they give a fuck, because it's like Mexicans and Latinos will like turn out for horror movies. That's like a huge part. Like I think they're in the United States, they're the majority ticket sale demographic.
So yeah, to go off on what you were saying about like the whole like Latinos just really love horror films. Have you guys happened to watch or heard of the recent film La Llorona from Guatemala?
Wait, how recent?
2019.
I've heard of La Llorona. If I don't know if it's the one that I'm thinking of, but I remember
so there's 2 films that came out that year. There's a James Wan production.
That's what I think. Yeah.
Which is The Curse of La Llorona. And then there's the one from Guatemala that came out that's called La Llorona. For those who don't know, it does cover the Mayan genocide that happened in the 80s. And it follows a military general who was basically at the forefront of all that. And the director, Hiru Bustamante, wanted to, bring attention to this because it's something that like I didn't know about and something that a lot of people didn't know about. And he said, he basically wanted to see, how do I bring this to the masses? And he said that he did a study, and just within films, like what are people consuming in Guatemala? And he said that it's people that they're either consuming superhero movies or horror films. So that's why he decided to make La Llorona a horror film, but that covers the Mayan genocide. So like it's kind of going to that, how like I imagine all Latinos just gravitate towards horror films,
and of course they would. I didn't even know Guatemala had the La Llorona.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I didn't know that was I thought that was a Mexican thing, like purely. But of course they'll turn out for that story. Like even we don't speak Spanish, but we fucking know La Llorona.
Exactly. Like I would say it's arguably like the biggest folklore legend in Latin America, because I'm gonna bring this to another horror film from Panama, which is called Diablo Party PTY, I believe. And that film, I'm gonna call it, I'm gonna say it's Panama Folklore 101, because it's basically these group of like 4 people that get stuck in this jungle, and they come across all these like folklore legends. So they come across like witches, they come across cannibalistic tribes, and this folklore legend in Panama called La Tulivieja, which is, I would kind of say it's a an iteration of La Llorona, because it kind of has the same backstory, but she turns into this monster at the end, like in the actual folklore and in the movie.
Yeah, so there's a few different ones, and it's they all have like a different name for her. Even like some of them, like I think an American term for her would be the woman in white, but some people say in red and some people say in black.
Or the weeping woman. Like there's just so many like different iterations, because it's it's one of those that are just it's used to be told orally, so like you kind of give your own spin in it, like subconsciously, you know what I mean? So
I was always interested in seeing an iteration of it before the American one came out. Because I talk about this all the time, where I feel like a lot of media that is made in Latin America, specifically Mexico, is very similar to like Japanese media.
I would say
and
that.
When you hear about La Llorona, like if you explain her without saying anything in Spanish, she sounds like a character from like I forget what they're called. They're like water spirits from Japan. There's a specific name in Japan for this genre of horror. It's like something water spirits. Because it sounds like a similar to like The Ring or something. So I just thought it'd be cool to see like someone, like a Japanese director, someone in that style make like a La Llorona movie.
I could see that. One actually that I just watched recently that was from China, I think. It's called The Chinese Ghost Story. from the 80s. And I would say that one's more like Evil Dead-esque, but I would say does have some sort of like, I don't even want to say influence because they're different countries, but there's a lot of similarities to this one character who I would say looks like La Llorona because she's mainly in all white. You know, she has long black hair and she's by the water.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting. I didn't even put that together.
yeah,
Like the ring.
yeah, the ring. Exactly.
Man. Okay, so I'm interested to know, like, I'm sure there's people out there want to know, like, who are some, for people that don't know where to start, like, who are some great, like, horror directors in Latin America that, like, they can check out?
I would say off the top of my head, I would definitely say Isa Lopez. Have you guys heard of Tigers Are Not Afraid?
No.
No?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
It's a Mexican horror film that just came out in like 2019, I think also actually, 2018. And that one actually stars the Noche Huerta.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, and he's
Yeah,
the
I
villain
think
in that
someone
one.
recommended it to
Yeah,
me.
that one I highly
think that's
recommend.
where, yeah.
I think that's a great starting point because it grabs a lot of influences of past Mexican horror films, but it puts it in a modern setting because it's about a group of kids that are just basically trying to survive a like both literal and figurative ghost town created by the cartel. So like you see a lot of like modern settings, but just a lot of stuff that you would see from past Mexican films. And I might be mistaken, but she did mention she might be doing like a new werewolf movie with Guillermo del Toro. I hope that happens. And that would be a great place to start for Mexican horror films. And then, you know, I mean, there's El Santo that you could try to find, but the thing is when you get to older Mexican films, they're a little harder to find. And if not, they're just strictly in Spanish. And that's the problem. So I grew up speaking Spanish, so like luckily I can just watch it without subtitles.
Right.
But like for
A lot of them don't have subtitles.
yeah, so
Well, I guess we gotta learn fucking Spanish. Huh?
but so I'm trying to see what else would be another famous like and like so here's the thing, like I wouldn't even, as much as I love Guillermo del Toro, like I'm wearing a shirt, you know what I mean? Like
I wanted to talk to you about him.
you know what I mean? Like as much as I love it,
Who could we think of the goats going like this?
exactly. I wouldn't really recommend him for Mexican or Latin American horror films because his films tend to take part in Spain. You know what I mean? If they're not in Spain,
Yeah.
they're in America.
You know what's so funny is because we were going to talk about that earlier because
Yeah.
it's like I think when people think of Mexican filmmakers and Mexican horror, they think Guillermo del Toro. And it was the assumption that he like puts a lot of like Mexican folklore and indigenous like
I also would
those
say,
stories into his movies.
at least from the movies of his that I've seen, I'd say he leans more into like fantasy than horror.
Yeah.
Like
I would
the
say
death isn't the point of the film.
but they're still horrific. Like that scene with the Pale Man.
Yeah,
That's just
yeah.
fucking scary, dude.
Yeah.
That's just
He loves
tense.
working with that guy. That guy's in all of his movies.
Yes, exactly.
That's,
It's this
the-
guy too.
the
I think he
Fishman.
does both. Yeah,
Yeah, he does both.
The Fishman.
That was one of the reasons why we wanted to have like you on and like why I was like interested in your profile in the first place was because like we've talked about it where it's like the big three, like I don't know if it's the big three, but like Cuarón, Iñárritu, Del Toro, like
they like Three Amigos, I think is what
Yeah.
they're called. Yeah.
is that makes sense. But like when they left Mexico for American film, they started working with like predominantly like
Wider
white movie stars instead
Yeah.
of, I mean, when you look back on their movies, there's a lot of white people in
Yeah.
those too, but
Yeah.
but still, it's like they're not working with like Mexicans anymore.
Yeah, and like that's one of the reasons why like I started doing my deep dive is because like again like I love Del Toro's movies, but like if they're not Spanish, they're just very like white passing. You know what I mean? And like I wanted to see someone that looked more like me. You know, like I wanted to see more indigenous people and like what their cultures have to say, and like just like I wanted to see more brown on screen. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
what it comes down to. You know. Because like again, like I grew up watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Scream. Well, I didn't grow up, but like you know what I mean. Like
Yeah.
I saw those films, and it's like it was just all white people. So I was like, man, like there has to be more out there, you know. And that's how I ended up doing my deep dive.
Right.
Yeah. So like one country that I personally love watching horror films from is Peru. because they I feel like their films are very like, it feels like a folk tale, you know what I mean? Like it's very because they include their indigenous culture a lot, even if it's not like its main like focus, you know, it's still there. Like there's a movie called Maligno, which is about this ghost that's like roaming basically this hospital, and that one actually feels very James Wan-esque. It's like, it's very good. Like it has very good tension, very good and pretty good jump scares. But the final act, like you see them go very deep into like indigenous cultures and like to fight off this evil, you know? And you know, you start to see like the way how they do their prayers and like how they do their rituals to basically fight off this entity. And I was like, wow, like I've never seen this before, you know? And then there's another film from Peru called, I think it's The Light on the Hill, which is, I guess you can call this more like a Coen's brother, like thriller, I guess, you know, labels. But to me, it's a horror film, how it's filmed, because like it has that horror like lens to it, where like the way how it zooms into a person who's dying, or like it finds, in this case, it does a bunch of like, when we're seeing like religious imagery, it does it in a very like intimidating and oppressive way where like you're scared of it, you know what I mean? But it's still, its main setting is a rural village, you know what I mean? And it's about these two coroners from the big city in Lima who go to this rural village and basically try to, you know, it's one of those where like they think they're superior, you know what I mean? And they can do whatever they want. It doesn't matter what happens to these indigenous people. And that's kind of what the film focuses on. But to go back to your question, so so Peru's a really great place to look. They do have like a little more easier films. And then Argentina, they've been putting out horror films since like the early 2000s, and their films are a lot easier to find. Have you guys watched Terrified?
No.
All right.
I don't know, because I'm thinking of a movie, but I'm pretty sure that the franchise I'm thinking of is called Quarantine.
If it's probably Wreck.
I've seen
If it's
Wreck.
Quarantine, yeah, that's from Spain though. Yeah, I know.
Fucking
I mean,
shit.
it's still a great movie. Like I know. Like I still have it in my top 10 because it's still like a very great movie.
It is a great movie,
you know what I mean?
but I thought it was like
Exactly my point.
Latin American.
And you know what? And that's a big like realization I had when I started this is, you know, I was like, oh, I think I've seen a lot of films in Spanish, you know, and then I realized they were all from Spain, and I was like, what?
Well, that was interesting because that's something that I was going to tell you earlier was that I was in part of this like movie club, like this movie Discord, and I was going through like my Mexican renaissance of like I had just watched the movie Güeros with Tenoch Huerta.
Great movie.
Yeah. And I was like recommending that to everybody, and I was like, holy shit, this came from Mexico. Like this is a Mexican movie. And so I started looking up like Mexican filmmakers and Mexican films, and I like reached out because these are all film buffs. Like they've seen the most obscure movies like you've ever heard of. And so I was like, oh, does anybody have any like Latin American, Spanish language, like directors or movies to recommend? And all of them were all either like Del Toro or they were Spanish movies. Yeah. Like they were all Spanish movies. And I was like, that's not quite what I'm looking for right now. So like when I saw you like posting about stuff, I was like, dude, this is like exactly what the fuck I'm looking for.
That's like, I don't know why the vibe of those movies is like the Del Taco Torta. Like it's not bad, but it's not what I'm asking for.
Exactly.
Real quick, if you're comfortable, I mean, I don't know how deeply personal this is, but because I noticed you talk a lot about like you highlight indigenous media whenever you can, and like indigenous Latinos like whenever you can. And I saw recently you were talking about like Jeff Barnaby. Yeah. So what was
so sad about that?
Yeah, that's what I was like. I saw you were sad. I was like, I don't know, I should bring this up. But like you were saying that he's like your favorite. He's like was like a power player in like indigenous film. Yeah. So like, can you tell us a little bit about him and like his movies?
Yeah. So he's a Canadian filmmaker. I don't know which tribe he's from. But yeah, his films, they're I feel like I've been saying this a lot lately. His films, there's something about them. And so when I look for my Latin American films mainly, I tend to gravitate towards films that are usually like I said, like that list, going against the colonial mindset, like, you know what I mean? Trying to go back to the roots of indigenous people, you know what I mean? And that's what his films did really fucking well. So like he has, and it's crazy because he only has 2 films out and like a couple of shorts. His 2 films are Rhymes for Young Ghouls and Blood Quantum. Both of these are, you know, it's going against the oppression that was brought over, you know what I mean, from the settlers and the colonizers, and they both fight it. They both fight this oppression in their different ways. Because Rhymes for Young Ghouls is, I call it a silent thriller, where, you know, not much happens. You can kind of consider it, I guess, like a drama, you know what I mean? But there's this like overbearing like intimidation that you can feel from the Catholic Church that's like it's up the hill from this indigenous people.
Oh shit.
And like basically what happens is like, and keep in mind this came out, I want to say late 2000s, maybe early 2010s. So it's before, you know, we even heard about the whole like burial grounds of all the children, you know what I mean? So like this guy was already trying to highlight this shit, you know what I mean? He was already showing that the Catholics, you know, we're grabbing indigenous people, like indigenous kids, and like there's scenes in there that's, you know, it's a little rough where like you see these white people like, and they're just like, luckily there's nothing very exploitative, but he shows just how rough they were to these little kids, you know what I mean? And like it's heartbreaking to watch. And luckily we get some sort of catharsis in there with our main protagonist. Whereas so Blood Quantum, that's the one that like fucking hit me hard, and it just like it hit all the right spots for me. So like I'm gonna admit I'm not a huge zombie fan, you know what I mean? Like I'll watch them, don't get me wrong, but I kind of put this one off for a while for that reason, because I was like, you know, like zombies, whatever, I'll give it a shot, you know, like, I don't got nothing to watch today. And it blew my mind on like what Jeff Barnaby was able to accomplish with this film, you know what I mean? Because like he's able, like, so here, let me see. Rhymes for Young Ghouls, like I said, it's a silent film, so you have to like really, its emotions aren't really, it's an emotional film, but you can't, like I said, like you can just feel more of the intimidation. Whereas Blood Quantum, it's fucking pissed off, you know what I mean? Like it is angry at these people that showed up and like destroyed all these lives, you know what I mean? Like it is very pissed off at all these white people that are just showed up.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, for those who don't know, like the film is basically about, basically if you have native blood, you won't be turned into a zombie. You know what I mean? Because it's airborne. Oh. So it goes back to the whole layer of like.
I've seen this movie.
Have you? Okay, yeah, I see. Like it brings in layers where like it's the white people bringing in the sickness and like destroying Native Americans. Native Americans. You know what I mean? Because Canada.
Native people aren't down with the sickness.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? And like, it's just so pissed off because it brings up all these colonial terms, you know, like Blood Quantum on like, you know, if you're indigenous, you know, the whole dealing with, the amount of indigenous blood in your body, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it deals with all of that. And on top of that, like you see themes of fatherhood. And I recently just turned into a father, like roughly around that time when I watched it. So like these themes just like fucking like bombarded me, and I was just like, oh my God, like what? Like I was just, man. And like, ever since then, like, yeah, like I've been trying to find stuff like that. And then, you know, 2020 came, I watched El Santo, and it all kind of just piled from there.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Like,
so I have one more. Do you have anything else? Cause I know we have some.
I don't have anything. Honestly, ironically, like, it didn't hit me when you first started describing it, but the entire time I was like, man, I wonder if he's seen this movie I've seen. And then I remembered you said Canadian, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, it's the same movie. Yeah. So no, I don't have anything else to ask.
This is off topic, and we don't have to talk about it, but have you ever seen, what was the name of the movie? No, I'm just kidding. It was this movie, it was like a zombie movie where it had to do with language, like there was like trigger words in language.
Oh, no, I don't think I've heard that one.
Weird name, it's like Pool something.
It's like Poughkeepsie, but it's not Poughkeepsie. It's
Can you
Not entirely sure.
It's a Canadian movie about zombies that has to do with words.
Yeah,
There's a
like
line that says "kiss means kill." Kiss means kill.
Yeah, that's like the start. They have to figure out the phrase that's triggering people.
No, yeah, I haven't.
It's a weird. Anyway, it's not a good movie. It's not even worth. It's not even worth it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do have a question. Well, you bring up the
Pontypool?
Was that
Pontypool?
Pontypool?
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Pontypool. Yeah, the
Pontypool.
one where I have seen that one where it's the guy in the radio station, right?
Right.
Yeah.
The only cool part of that movie was when they were doing the only cool part of that movie was how they showed like the zombies are coming with like the helicopter guy in the car, and you find out that he's actually like in a car on top of a hill just like looking over the city. But I mean, I don't know why I thought it's such a weird movie. And like I remember the concept is so cool that I kept trying to watch it.
But you just couldn't get it.
But it's just so
It's
boring.
No, I know.
There's a lot of weird movies like that where like there's something like I don't know if esoteric's the right word, but there's something like it's not physical that's causing it. Yeah, like there's like the Crazies where madness is just like spreading. Like people are literally just going crazy for no reason and killing each other.
And you know what I have noticed though, 2022 has had a good amount of films like that come out.
Yeah.
Where they're not considered like zombies, they're more like infected people. But you start to see like their inner like, I don't want to say this like desires, but like basically just the savagery of humanity basically. And I do even feel like that's a lot to do with just what we've witnessed with the pandemic, you know what I mean? Because like, so there's a big movie that actually came out from Thailand called The Sadness, which is an extreme film from Thailand. And it does just that. Like it's these people that are just like zombies, but they're very sadistic and like it's pretty hardcore. Like there's a lot of essay in it. There's a lot of yeah, it's rough. It's a rough film, but it got the horror community people talking. You know what I mean? It's one of the bigger extreme films to come out with such a big release.
Yeah.
But there's one from Uruguay that kind of deals with the same deal, just not as extreme. Where it's these people that revert to their own like savagery within humanity, and but they kind of look like zombies, and so they don't like automatically just kill you for blood. Like they'll kind of just fuck with you, and I've noticed a trend of that happening a lot.
Yeah, when you described that second one, it reminded me of, I don't think it has the same message as that movie, but the same kind of idea. It reminded me of Bird Box.
Yeah, I could say that. It's kind of like that where instead of just like one initial outbreak of looking at it, like it's like people just doing this like
like at first nobody
crap.
knows where it's coming from, and then it's alleged that it's like these beings that are just like fucking with people.
Exactly. And then the movie that I mentioned from Uruguay is Virus 32, just
Virus
in case.
32.
And it's on Shudder if anyone wants to watch it.
Sick. Okay, so the question that I wanted to ask, just to make sure we cover all bases, and I'm sorry if this is putting you on the spot, so take your time with it.
Yeah.
Is there any like Latin American, indigenous, like female or queer directors that people that are interested in that, like that you can think of that you recommend?
Talking about the queer aspect, there is one film from Brazil that comes on top of my mind. I would consider this a horror film as much as any Guillermo del Toro film, where it's more of like a dark fantasy, but it does have those horror tropes. And that one is called The Good Manners. So that one, I think it does a great job with its like queer representation, because we follow we even follow a black person and a whiter like complexion, but they're both Brazilian. So, but yeah, like we see their the first half of the film actually follows a relationship in such a beautiful way. Honestly, like it feels very genuine. And then we get to the whole like werewolf story towards the end, where it's about like more like parenting and stuff, but it's about a werewolf.
That's pretty sick.
Yeah, so that's the one I could think of off the top of my head, which is Good Manners from Brazil, and Alucarda, which is the one that I mentioned quite a bit already. That one does have some like queer subtext. I wouldn't necessarily call it like a full out queer film, but it definitely has that subtext to it. I don't. Oh, there's actually another Brazilian film that briefly covers like a small like a queer relationship, which is called Skull the Mask. And that one actually is one of the films that I recently recommended for like that challenges the colonial mindset as well.
Okay.
With that film, like we do see how Portuguese really demonized these indigenous beliefs, because the film is called Skull La Máscara de Ahanga, and Ahanga is actually a indigenous belief who was actually like shown to protect. It was a spirit that was shown to protect the jungle, but once the Portuguese showed up, they translated that name to the devil, to the Catholic devil. You know what I mean?
Is that the folklore about the dude with the backwards feet?
I'm not entirely sure.
There's a creature.
That
I
I'm not
learned about
entirely
this
sure.
when I learned about Duende or Duende. I feel like it's the same because you said it was it Brazil or Peru?
Brazil.
I think it's the same guy. It might be.
Probably.
I might be thinking of Peruvian
I'm not entirely
folklore.
sure. Yeah, like this is the
Because
first
I've
time.
seen two versions of it. One of them where it's like a little bit more playful, like he's a
Mischievous.
yeah, like what do you call that? Like a not a pixie, but there's a name for
Sprite.
it. Yes, and then there's other depictions where he's a lot more like vengeful. Like he's still
That would make
mischievous,
sense.
but he's a lot more like. I remember he's depicted as like red haired with backwards feet, so that you can't tell which direction he's coming from.
That's pretty cool.
And he has like a staff, and I think
I have no clue.
in some iterations he casts magic, and other ones he like eats your head or something.
I mean, that sounds pretty cool. But yeah. So like basically what happens is Anhanga is turns into this mask basically. So whoever wears this mask, you know, turns into the protector of the spirit, and then he ends up basically just killing. It's kind of like a slasher film where he's like the Brazilian Jason, but with like luchador moves, because he's actually luchador, a real life like wrestler, which is pretty cool. Yeah, and then so he's just out like basically just creating havoc, and it's its form of revenge against.
When he puts a mask on, does he say "Somebody stop me"?
No, he's just completely quiet. But yeah, so those are the ones I can think of with queer representation, like off the top of my head. And Skull and Mask, also has that indigenous representation. And then trying to see, it sucks because there is a lot of colorism within Latin America still too. So like,
so
it's rough because like if you go to like Argentina, like a lot of their films do feature a lot of more like white passing people. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's really rough. And that's another reason why I really liked Peru. Was because a lot of their films, like I said, deal with indigenous culture. Like it was pretty hard to find an Argentinian film that dealt with its indigenous culture. But they do have a lot of films, so like their films are a lot more accessible. Chile actually has a lot more accessible films too. One thing I will say about Chile: be careful. Be careful. So I'm a fan of extreme films. I've mentioned it already. They have a lot of extreme films. So if you do decide to go look into Chile, like just be careful because their films are very
spicy.
Yes, very spicy, very intense. But they're still great films. Like one of the more accessible ones that I believe is still on Shudder is called The Wolf House. And that one's just fucking, it's not extreme, but it's fucking disturbing. Like it's an animation film, and it deals with this Colonia Dignidad, which was run by an ex-Nazi who fled to Germany. Who fled to Chile, and this fool was known for like just a lot of like essays towards like children and stuff. Like it's horrible, and he was in cahoots with the dictator of the time in Chile. So like that's what this film basically comments on.
It's based on truth?
Yes.
Oh shit.
Yeah, and that's what this
Wolf
film.
House?
No. The name of the film is called The Wolf House. But yeah, so that's pretty much all I have to say about Chile is just be careful. It's pretty rough.
Was it you that posted about it recently, or somebody? I saw a video recently that said that the new VHS series that's coming out, one of the films will be directed by a indigenous woman or a
Mexican Canadian, yeah.
Mexican
Gigi Saul Guerrero.
Yeah.
I'm really excited for that one.
It's gonna be sick.
Yeah. For those who don't know, she actually has 2 films with Blumhouse Productions. One of them, she's really great at like uplifting marginalized voices. Her first one is called Culture Shock, which is about a Mexican woman who, you know, crosses the border illegally, but she gets trapped by some white people, you know, and then that's kind of how that goes. The other film is called Bingo Hell, where it deals with like a group of like elderly POC people who have to fight off like gentrification, like a personified version of gentrification through this white man called Mr. Big, and so that's pretty cool too.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's meant to be funny.
No, yeah, that one's actually that one's like a horror comedy.
What do you think is a scarier concept, La Llorona or El Cucuy?
Who asked that?
That's from Dungeon Geo.
Oh,
Our
that's
buddy
funny.
Geo.
So
Shout out Giovanni.
I would say El Cucuy, just because like growing up, there was never really a set form for him. You know what I mean?
Right.
You don't know what he looks like. Like you just heard of his name and you're supposed to be scared and you're like, oh shit, why am I scared of this guy? You know?
Yeah.
Whereas La Llorona, you know, it's a woman. It's
And who's
still
afraid
scary.
of women? Am I right?
Well, I know that.
I'm just kidding. Jesus Christ, Ryan, you're supposed to laugh. No.
It took me a second. Because I was focusing. That was always just because when I see like iterations of Kukui, it's described as like a lot of people use Day of the Dead makeup to represent it because it's described as like a walking skull when you see it. Like no one knows for sure except for the people that have been taken by
I've
it.
never heard of walking skull. Is it?
Honestly, I didn't hear about the school. Like,
But that's the thing is like, yeah, I think you're right. It's just like a big scary man or a big scary
it's just
something.
something scary.
It's
like
whatever. You're just told that it is scary, and so I think it's like it's in letting your mind run wild with like
exactly, and that's scarier.
It
Yeah.
reminds me of, I think there's two versions of this creature. It's in Japanese lore and in Chinese lore, but there's a like worm creature that steals faces. So nobody knows what its original face looks like. It's a demon.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice.
It's really cool. It was
mean,
in Avatar.
It's
But
just
there's
like,
other iteration.
yeah. The kukui is straight up just something to keep kids in check from like going into the liquor cabinet or something. Like
Te va a agarrar el cucuy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I remember they used to use that shit on us too. Like and it was funny because there was nothing for us to get into, but it was just to scare us. Yeah, I think the kukui probably La Llorona is scary for a while, and then I think you get used to it faster.
I think the final one we have. Is are you going to check out Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities?
No, yeah, of course. Like I still love his work. Don't get me wrong. You know what I mean? I still love it a lot.
I haven't seen any like trailer. I've seen like a bunch of behind the scenes teaser stuff for it from the actors that are going to be involved, but I can't like get a vibe on the show. There's like comedians in it. There's dramatic actors. There's like Eric Andre's
It's
in
supposed
it.
to be like a anthology, correct?
That's what I'm
correct?
getting from
Okay,
it,
yeah.
but I don't know if it's supposed to be comedy or not.
Yeah, I could see that. Regardless, like I'm still very excited for any Del Toro project. Like I know he has that Pinocchio one coming out too.
Oh yeah.
So like, you know, I'm excited for that. That one's been in the works for like 10 years.
Is it going to be like a scary or like a more like closer to like the Brothers Grimm? Is it Brothers Grimm?
I'm not entirely sure, but like I do know he's trying. I would say if anything, I'm assuming he's going for like a Coraline vibe, where like it's intended for children, but it still has that like grotesque aspect to it. You know what I mean? Where it's supposed to be kind of creepy, kind of scary.
Yeah, because I think there was two after like the late 1800, early 19. I think there was two main sources for folk, like English and like European folklore. Which, one of them was the Brothers Grimm. I think the other one was the Mother Goose storybooks. And I think Pinocchio is Mother Goose, but I could be wrong.
Mother Goose is just as twisted though, right? From what I remember.
Sorry?
Mother Goose, like their stories are just as twisted, right?
Yeah, it's just a different set of stories. Like I think like Cinderella and like a lot of princess stories are Brothers Grimm. A lot of ones, especially ones that have to do with like creatures.
Yeah.
And then the ones that are a bit more like Kukui, like just to scare children, are the
Mother
ones that
Goose.
are Mother Goose.
Gotcha.
Like I think Jack. Two examples are Pinocchio and I think Jack and the Giant Beanstalk are.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Jack Black and the Beanstalk.
That'd be funny. Black beans.
Jesus Christ, I just totally spaced for a second.
Is it because I was talking?
No.
Fine. I'm just kidding.
Hell yeah. I mean, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, no problem.
And for honestly, I'm going to give horror and all of these movies a check
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing that's most intimidating, especially when it comes to like Latin American movies, especially when you don't speak Spanish, is like not knowing who to look out for, where to go. Yeah. So I was like super excited to have you here. Where can people find you?
People can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok on Mikey Peralta Jr. I am a lot more active on TikTok. That's just I just enjoy it a lot more compared to the other apps. And then my writing, you can find it on Dread Central, which is under the column Horror in Espanol. And again, like I pretty much promote everything through my TikTok. And then I know, just kind of random, but I do sell horror bandanas. You know, like I screen print them.
Oh, sick.
So you know, you guys can look that up on Etsy, on Descent into Horror on Etsy. And you know, for one last thing is basically you guys can find everything on descentintohorror.com.
Descentintohorror.com. That's where you
Descent to Horror. So that's where I have my writing profile. That's where I have like my Etsy stuff. That's where I have my links to like my letterbox, where I'm just always trying to find these films. Oh, and then one thing about TikTok is most of the films I do talk about, I try to find the films that are more easily accessible.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I know not everyone speaks Spanish, and like not everyone has access to like being able to buy like a random ass movie. You know what I mean? Like, so I do try to promote more movies that are more easier to find. So
hell yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So there was this question we didn't answer in the Q&A because I wanted to be if you made it this far, but it comes from Honey Revenge. If you made it this far, leave in the comments, what was your first horror movie and how old were you when you saw it?
I think it was Chucky.
I think mine was also Chucky, but I was like 3. I used to be desensitized to movies, and then I realized that people could die, and I fucking was scared of everything for 20 years.
And I'm just back on like my early memories of like Scream, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Ring. I don't know which one was my first one, but those are definitely the ones that left an impact on me.
I think if I can remember, I only remember the ending of it, but I think the first ever horror movie I saw, or scary movie, was The Wolfman.
Oh, nice.
But it was on one of these trips to our family in Texas, and it was completely in Spanish.
Nice.
Hell yeah.
Well,
all right.
Do you know what we say at the end of our episodes?
Don't fly. Right?
Yeah. So, from all of us at Un Poquito, don't fly.